Hi, I'm Kathy Rushing, host of the podcast Committed, the Entrepreneur Marriage. If your middle name is Restless and you identify with words like innovator, dreamer, changemaker, creative, independent, or you are married to an entrepreneur, or heaven help you, you're both entrepreneurs, this podcast is for you. The entrepreneurial journey can be a little wild at times, like uncharted territory. Join me as I talk with others who are at various stages of the entrepreneurial process. We'll explore the wisdom and insights they have gained while navigating the ups and downs of the entrepreneur journey. You'll discover that there are many couples who have found ways to thrive in both their marriage and business. Sheryl O'Loughlin is the author of Killing It, an entrepreneur's guide to keeping your head without losing your heart. She has successfully served as CEO of Clif and REBBL. That's a company that makes super herb drinks. She co-founded Plum Organics, the hardest thing she's ever done, she said. Currently, she works with the J.E.D.I Collaborative, a group that seeks to help build a natural products industry that promotes justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. After leaving Plum, Sheryl thought teaching might be a nice break from the roller coaster of launching a new business. She accepted the position of Executive Director of the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies in the Stanford Graduate School of Business. That's a mouthful. As she mentored entrepreneur students, she realized that no one was talking about the realities of startup life, how few startups actually make it, and the price many pay getting there, personally, emotionally, and physically. This became her inspiration for sharing her hard-won lessons in the book. She deeply believes that entrepreneurs need a healthier paradigm, one that balances the whole person. There are several interviews out there with Sheryl that focus on her experience as CEO and founder, so we don't dive into that. Instead, this interview focuses more on the intersection of her marriage and entrepreneurial experience. Her husband, Patrick, did not want to be interviewed, so we miss his voice. He graciously gives Sheryl his blessing to discuss their marriage and things they've learned along the way, as she does so honestly in her book. Sheryl is passionate and refreshingly honest with so much wisdom to share. I hope you will have grace for some audio issues we experienced. As a team of 3, that's me, myself, and I, there is still a learning curve, and some things I'm learning the hard way. Join me now as I welcome Sheryl to the podcast. Sheryl, welcome to Committed, the Entrepreneur Marriage podcast. I am really grateful for your time today.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. I'm honored to be here. I really appreciate it.
You have been a mentor to so many. You've taken your seat at the table, helping other women see they belong there. You've mentored many entrepreneurs and students, and you have opened up discussions involving mental health and even marriage, topics that few are willing to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you.
I discovered your book, Killing It, An Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Head Without Losing Your Heart, about 2 years ago. I had been looking for resources, anything that addressed the entrepreneur life, and especially when it involves a relationship like marriage. And when I say marriage, I hope people know by now that includes any committed relationship. So however you define it works here. But there aren't many that take such an honest approach, looking at the whole entrepreneur lifestyle. And so I'm grateful for the way that you really pulled back the curtain and allowed us into your experiences and the wisdom that you've shared. And
Thank you.
I'd like to go a little deeper in some of the areas that you talked about. Here's a quote from your book, and I won't give away all of the book. I really want to encourage anyone listening to this to please go buy it. It really is a gem, because what Sheryl
Thank
did
you.
in this book is she laid out questions that you should be thinking about at the beginning. But here's your quote. We hear stories about victorious climbs all the time. What we don't hear are stories about the day-to-day process and the difficulty of the journey, and about the rarity of actually making it to the top. Those stories don't make for sexy headlines. The profession is filled with deeply distressed, or at the very least, chronically unhappy and unhealthy people. And that discontent comes home and affects everyone else who lives there. Sheryl, when I read that, I was just like fist pumping. I'm like, I know I'm not the only one out there.
Everybody says that to me.
I know.
We all think we're nuts.
And yeah, sometimes we are. I was speaking for myself, but tell me a little bit about how the idea of the book came about.
Yeah. Well, I had been an entrepreneur, having been, around an entrepreneur. I was the CEO of Clif and Gary, who is the co-founder and the owner of the company, is the quintessential entrepreneur, and learned so much from him. And then co-founded a company called Plum Organics, which is little baby food pouches that people might know about. And I needed a break. Starting a company from scratch, and we'll talk about that, was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I went to work for Stanford, and it's so funny because I wanted just to really take this break completely from the day-to-day grind of what I was doing. And I always had this image of my mind of working for a university, and the sun would be shining and everyone was talking about big ideas. And I thought it was this big fantasy. And then all of a sudden I found myself interviewing for this job at Stanford at the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies at the Graduate School of Business. And it was exactly that. It's just like, the place is la la land. And so I took this job, and I met all of these entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I needed to do was to advise students. And here, you can imagine you're in the middle of Sand Hill Road. Money is growing on trees there, and there's billionaires teaching classes. I mean, the place is like another planet. And here are these students, and they'd come to me and they'd talk about these ideas that they had that would, of course, inevitably become the next billion-dollar idea. And
on their first try.
On their first try, of course. Oh, well, yes, exactly. They had also started about 10 nonprofits before in their prior life, of course, before coming to Stanford. And I thought, they have no idea. They have absolutely no idea how hard it is. And I realized nobody was talking about it. Nobody. And I thought to myself, why is this? And you see them, if you look at all the headlines and you listen to the professors, and it was like just this culture of, if we reveal our weakness, we won't be able to get the resources. We won't be able to get people to trust us. We won't have our family be able to believe in us. And I thought, this has got to change. Mm-hmm. This has absolutely got to change.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you're familiar with Dorcas Chang Tozin and her book. She wrote a book called Start, Love, Repeat. And she was my she was on my guest on another episode, and she talked about that process. I think her husband Ned also went to Stanford, and they raised money for a social enterprise. And she talked about how one of their investors was actually very interested in their marriage. He wanted to know that their marriage was strong because,
Wow.
if the marriage doesn't work out, that has a huge ripple effect in the business and ownership and all of that. So I am on board with you that, we really need to focus on this more.
Yeah.
So you released the book about 4 years ago. Is that right?
Oh my God. Yes. Weird. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah. And I'm curious if there's anything you've learned in that
Mm.
interim that you would add, because you covered a lot of great subjects, and maybe something that you would add to one of the topics.
No, it's an interesting question because so in 2017, we live in Santa Rosa, which is part of Sonoma County. And 2017, the fires ripped through. They did
Oh
again
my
this year.
goodness. Yeah.
And that year in 2017, we lost our home. And
Oh.
I say that because, it was a really interesting experience. It's through all the hard stuff that you really come out the other side having a whole different view of life. It becomes your
Mhm.
defining moment almost to get to a different the next level of consciousness in some way.
Yeah.
Here we lost everything, and we're so lucky. I feel such privilege in that we were able to get through it, and where so many people have been so devastated, and it's been so difficult. And so I'm beyond grateful for that. And it really helped me to realize that here we it took everything that we had went away, except that we had each other, and our family was intact, our health was intact, and, and that was really what was most important. At the end of the day, the stuff didn't matter. And Patrick and my husband, spent a lot of time talking about it, and we said, here we're living our life this certain way in this paradigm really that we're all living in because of the society that we live in. And we're feeling like we got to keep grinding and grinding and grinding. And we're in a privileged enough situation where we we had we had enough. We didn't need necessarily more. And so we took a real step back, and I was actually had stayed at REBBL, the company that I talked about in the book that I had just started at the time. And I stayed there for 4 years, loved every minute of it, just incredibly wonderful company. And but my husband and I said, life is so short. Our kids
Mhm.
are getting older. Let's use this chance to live a different paradigm. And so I decided to leave REBBL, and we just shifted the focus of our time. And out of that, I ended up starting two nonprofits. One that's called the J.E.D.I Collaborative, stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, to help to the natural products industry, which has been the industry I've been in my whole career, to realize justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and which is astronomically important. And we need to in our industry, because we have an industry that is focused on healthy products, but we're only getting to them to the small segment of the population. And I also started a nonprofit called the Women on Boards Project to get more women on boards. And I say that because with everything that happened with the fire, with this living a different paradigm and starting these two nonprofits and doing other board work now, what it dawned on me when as I take a step back from it, is that, as entrepreneurs, when we start something, we think this is it. This is our identity. We're so locked into this. Our self-worth feels like it's totally encapsulated in it. And as I think about my career now that I'm getting older and older and older, my son just turned 20 yesterday. I
Oh,
I know it blows my mind. And I think about that. Our, we're in some ways, we're as entrepreneurs, we're artists and we create things on a canvas and we think that we just have this one canvas. And what I'm realizing is no, you take out a new canvas and you paint a new picture
mm,
and then a new one. It's almost like creative destruction so that you can construct something else that's even steps even more into what you want to become in this world
yeah.
in terms of your legacy. So now, like this Jedi collaborative to me is like, this is the world I want to see, and I'm painting a different picture now on a different canvas. And so I think that's kind of where I've come to since the book.
Okay, that is so powerful, and I did not know that about your home. I am so sorry to hear that, and I live in Granby, Colorado, which just there's a fire here that I was driving through a neighborhood just Sunday and I
Devastating.
needed to see it with my own eyes. Our home is okay, so we're grateful, but our community's been impacted, and you've
Ugh.
been through that, so
It's terrible. I mean, we just in the fire just here a couple months ago, it was a mile away from our house. People have lost their house twice.
oh my goodness. Did
It's
you rebuild where your first home was?
no, because the insurance one didn't fully cover the cost of rebuilding. So we lived down the
Okay.
street from our other house, where our
Oh
other house
my
was.
goodness. But that's really traumatic, so it's very inspiring to hear that you were able to kinda
It's
plant
all
your
about
feet.
reality. The
Mhm.
world has changed. Things are happening. The climate has changed.
Yes,
That's our
yes. Well,
reality.
gosh, thank you again. I mean, I think some of what I enjoyed so much about your book, Cheryl, is you're so vulnerable, and you just don't find that a lot in the world of entrepreneurship, especially, but in the world in general. We tend to hide and,
Yeah.
gosh, I can't tell you what's really going on because what would you think of me or
Yes.
how would that look? So
Yes.
thanks for sharing that.
Oh, thank you.
I found some other great interviews with you that really tap into your business expertise, but today I want to go a little deeper about that intersection between marriage and entrepreneur life.
Yes,
And you talk in your book a lot about your relationship with Patrick, and he sounds like an amazing partner and person and friend.
yes.
Um,
Yes.
for those listening, he did not want to be interviewed, but said it'd be okay if we talked about him very nicely. No, those are
He would be okay if we talked about him not so nicely too.
well, those are my words, but, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship. How long have you guys been married?
Oh, how long have we been married? Been married since 97. How many years is that? 23? 23?
Well, congratulations.
Yes, yes.
That's
20,
awesome.
almost 24. Yeah, but we've been together since 1990. So,
Okay. So that's 30 years, and I know that because my daughter turned 30 this week, and she turned yeah,
oh,
so
wow,
she was in
congratulations.
90.
That's a big
Um,
milestone.
yeah, and you guys have 2 boys, right?
We have two boys, soon to be in a week to be 17 and again a 20-year-old.
And 20. Very good. So, tell us a little bit about how you guys met.
We're actually both working at General Foods, which now is no longer named General Foods. It's actually
Mhm.
Kraft. And we were there was just a group of young people and that were there, and we'd go out and we'd all party together, and there were just all these clandestine couples that nobody knew about. And Patrick and I started dating. We were working on this project together. I was running the cool. Embarrassingly enough, I've been in the natural products industry forever. I was running the Kool-Aid, the flavored powdered sugar, and was running the Kool-Aid Wacky Warehouse, where kids had to collect little UPC codes to get toys. And I needed to figure out how to manage the inventory of the warehouse. And Patrick was this brilliant IT guy. And so I said, can you help me to find an algorithm to make this, it make me figure out the inventory that we needed. And then I was like, God, this guy's pretty smart and he's pretty cool. And all of a sudden, one thing led to another. And then he moved to California 1 month later.
Oh,
I thought that was the end of it. I was living in New York.
yeah. So what happened after that?
It just kept going long term for 1 year. And I finally said, you know what, this guy's pretty great. And I moved out to California.
So you moved out there. Well, it is challenging enough to have one entrepreneur in the family, but you guys are both entrepreneurs.
Yeah, well,
That
that was not the best move we've ever made. Patrick went on to work at Clorox, very stable job, wonderful company. That was a lot easier.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask if you knew at the time that you were entrepreneurs or who was the first to kind of dip their toe in that water.
That's an excellent question. No one has asked me that before. We both did it for the first time at the same time. That was not a smart move at all. He was, believe it or not, he has always been the one to have the spirit of an entrepreneur. He's much more of a risk taker than I am. I ended up being the one that was the continuous entrepreneur, and he went to work for the big company, which is so interesting. But, I taught over at Sonoma State University, taught entrepreneurs, and I worked with this tenure professor who had this game that he played with students. I talk about it in the book, where he'd say, okay, the students who wanted to be entrepreneurs, I will either give you $1 now, or I'll give you $100 at the end of the year. What would the entrepreneur do? Everyone would raise their hand and say, I'll take the $100 down the line. He's like, entrepreneurs don't take the $100 down the line. They take the dollar that's here right now because it's a resource and you need it. I mitigate risk. That's how I am as an entrepreneur. I mitigate risk.
Yeah, that's interesting because as my husband talks with different people that are maybe thinking about being entrepreneurs or maybe they've already launched, but one friend in particular, he's really not a risk taker. And I think it's a little bit of a misnomer that they're always risk takers. As you said, they mitigate risk.
Right. Exactly. You have to, because you have no safety net. You're creating the safety net.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got to address as much as you can going into it. Would you say that you and Patrick are more alike, or are you opposites in ways that strengthen each other and your family?
Oh my God. We are opposites. So here's what we share. We share values, absolutely. Even though he's Catholic, I'm Jewish, our values are completely aligned.
Uh-huh.
We share our number one value is family love. We share that.
Yeah.
What we don't share is our approach in many ways. He is Mr. Calm, cool. He lives his life kind of like, like this. It kind of, life is good and we go along and all's good. I live my life like a roller coaster. And every day is up and down and there. And he evens me out. And I think he would say, if he were here, that I help to make life a little more exciting.
I always find it interesting, with couples, because some people say opposites attract. Other people are like, no, you have to be the same and everything. And I just say, how boring would that be to be married to yourself,
We would drive each other. If he were me, we would not be married anymore. He would drive me up the friggin' wall.
So you found a way to balance that, and that's awesome. Want to dive in a little bit to one of the chapters in your book on the entrepreneur and romance. You cover different relationships. You cover friendships and partnerships and romance. I know I'm missing some others, but in this chapter, you describe a time when you and Patrick were both involved in startups. Patrick's startup, Blue Sky, ended up not making it.
Mhm.
And I'd like to dig a little deeper,
Mhm.
partly because I was thinking this must be the most difficult time. But hearing your story about the fire, that might have been a more difficult time.
No,
I don't know.
no, the fire was not even a quarter of how difficult the time was with what Patrick went through.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, it's, a big thing. What's important is your health, love, but finances. And that's what I'm saying. When we went through the fire, we were okay on finances, and so many people weren't. And when we went through Blue Sky, it took everything. I mean, we were financially devastated, and that was so deeply scary. So deeply scary. So here I told you how Patrick is always even keeled.
Mhm.
He went through such a deep depression. He could
Mhm.
not literally could not get out of bed for 3 months. He
Mhm.
had to go to the Stanford sleep clinic to learn how to sleep again.
Yeah.
It was We didn't know what we were going to do. So that by far was so much harder.
Yeah. And when you talk about, I think you reference something like 95% of startups don't make it. So that was not at all unusual, but I don't know if there's a way for us to prepare. I mean, looking back, would you have done anything differently?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And he would say that too. So what we thought is we were creating a balanced portfolio, if you will.
Mhm.
My company was funded through venture capital, so it felt like it had a bigger safety net. With his, we said, okay, well, we're going to put our family finances into this thing, and we thought, they balance each other out.
Mhm.
The What we did, however, with Patrick's company is the way he articulates it. It was a family set context. Uh, it was healthy family entertainment place. It was like the antithesis of Chuck E. Cheese, where there were activities that were, physical for kids and creative, and we served healthy food, and parents could get a glass of wine and a beer, and everyone we told about this concept was like, that is the greatest concept in the world. That's where you got to really understand the feedback you're getting. Greatest concept in the world. Why isn't anyone done it? Well, that's why you got to ask yourself, why isn't anyone done it? And what Patrick again would say is he created a Taj Mahal. So we got this huge space in Emeryville, and we were so naive. We had absolutely no idea that you don't take on a space that big, agree out of your personal finances to take on the rent, no upgrades from the landlord. All of a sudden, we kept finding out, oh, delays from the city. Oh, we gotta upgrade this thing, that thing. The whole time we're spewing out money with the place not opened
Mm.
for the rent, and paying all this other money. And so time is going by, and it's a beautiful, it actually was not a beautiful summer. It was very rainy in Emeryville, California. And finally, after going through all this, it's time to open this indoor play space. Doors open, sun comes out. It is beautiful outside. After it's been crappy outside, nobody wants to go in and go into an indoor play space. Well, we had burned through most of the money, and then we opened the doors, not nearly at all to capacity. And I will always remember today. So here I'm doing my own startup. I'm stressed out. I have a really difficult investor. And I came home one day and Patrick walks in the door and he's literally white as a ghost. And, here's my calm husband. And I've never, I hope I never have to experience this again. He's white as a ghost and literally cold to the touch. And Patrick, what is going on? And he could not speak. And I don't know if it was 2 seconds. I don't know if it was an hour. I don't know how much time passed, but he literally could not speak. And finally, he looks at me and he says, "It's all gone." Are you talking about? It's all gone. So I burned through all of our money. We have nothing left. And here we have this lease. We were stuck with this lease. And so there was more money to go out the door. We took out part of our 401k because we didn't know what to do. I wanted to support him and give it more of a chance. That burned through in a second. That was complete waste. And it was just, we had to go through trying to figure out what this landlord, it was the whole thing was phone calls from debtors. The whole thing was horrible. So if I would have done, long story short, I would have done it completely differently. Patrick would have done it completely differently. We would have gotten someone that understood the restaurant space. We would not have done what we did with the landlord. I mean, there's lesson after lesson after lesson. You have to have people with a knowledge of that industry, no matter how smart we mistakenly thought we were, and unhumble, because we thought, oh, we're MBAs, we'll figure it out, it will work. That was wrong answer. So
Yeah. And I think part of what motivates both of us is if we can take the hard things or things we learned the hard way and share them, but I don't know. I sometimes wonder, do you think anybody listens?
yeah, you know what? I really do. But to your point, it takes humility, and being humble it's really hard. Because here, I'll take it to the mindset that that Patrick had. And he'd share if he were here, which is when he had this whole concept, this mindset, and people say, I remember students saying this to me at Stanford too. Everybody's a naysayer. Everyone will tell you your concept is bad. So you just have to take the risk and be brave, blah, blah, blah. Look what, Steve Jobs does. Well, Steve Jobs is one in a million and did not take as much risk as people think he did. And so what Patrick, so he was ignoring the naysayers and people saying, you know what, a lot of restaurant businesses are really hard, they fail, blah, blah, blah. And Patrick said, what he didn't do is see the thread of truth in that. And I'm not going to do this because I don't know this industry until I find a partner that will do it with me, that knows intimately what this industry is all about. And that was the thread of truth he missed. So what I always encourage entrepreneurs to do is not that you have to pay attention to everything that everyone says, or I should say, pay attention. You don't have to take action on everything that everyone says, but find the thread that is going through each of these that is telling you the thread of truth.
That's so good. As you said, you and Patrick share a very deep value for the importance of family, and it sounds like you kinda clung on to each other and got through that time. What are some other things you think you did well during that time? How did you stay connected? And you talk a little bit in the book about not having resentment, which is really difficult.
Yes. Yeah, it is so easy to blame each other. And it is, yeah, it's like almost a self-protection. Like, I didn't do this, that person did that. And, I said to Patrick, I remember that when he talked about this idea and he wanted to do it so badly, and I had held off for a while and really like, I'm nervous. I mean, this really went against my grain of it just stretched us too far. And I saw how passionately he wanted to do this. And I finally said to him one day, and I remember it was Thanksgiving, in it was 2007, I believe. I said to him, "Okay, I'm there. Let's do this. I know how much you believe in this and how important this is to you.
Mm.
Let's do this." And I will never forget that. And I said to him, I said, I'm in this thing. I'm in this thing now, even though it went bad. I'm in this thing with you. That doesn't change the commitment that I made to do this together. Now, I would say, as a couple, it is so important that you're holding hands and making it happen. Now, I'll have to say it was hard because I know that if I would have said no, it would have been really hard. I mean, he would have resented that too. I know, and we've talked about that. I know he would have. So I'm not going to say, I'm this great, wonderful person. I was afraid too. But the point is that we're in this together. It's a life that we have together, and we're all going to make compromise. We're going to make compromises. We're going to do things that maybe we wish we never would have done. Yeah, I'd say it, of course. I wish I would have said no. But you know what? If I would have said no, he would have always wondered. So
Right.
I couldn't
Yeah.
say, I don't think I could have said no. So
Yeah.
life goes on. I think that's the thing that we forget. And I look at my kids and I try to tell them now, life goes on. You go through hard stuff and it goes on.
Yeah. Well, you guys have really modeled that. And I'm sure there were days where, again, one's up and one's down, and it's really hard when you're both down and you see your husband so depressed. Yeah.
That's such an interesting point, Kathy, because when he went through his depression, it was almost like I became, everyone says you hear these stories of moms picking up the cars like an adrenaline rush when their kids are, in danger underneath the car. That's how I felt like I had an adrenaline rush for 3 months. I literally could not feel. I could not feel. And as soon as he started getting better, it's amazing. After 3 months, he popped right out of it and became himself again. I fell apart. I completely fell apart. And I talk about it in the book. I ended up coming down with an eating disorder because I needed to control something. And the easiest thing to control was my eating and my exercise. So that's what I did. So I fell apart too. But when he fell apart, I was there. When I fell apart, he was there.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And the other thing that strikes me is that you guys had some history together
Mhm.
already. I think about if that had happened, say, in your first year of marriage,
Mm, good point.
be really even more challenging. Um, what I learned in your book is, again, this deep friendship that you and Patrick have and how you refer to him as your best friend.
Mhm.
What are some things that you all did to create that foundation prior to that time?
Hmm. Well, we in some ways grew up together. We were 24 when we met, and close to 30 or 30 when we got married. And I think in that I really think a big part of it was communicating with each other. And that sounds so trite, but it was being in constant dialogue and saying our truth and being open to each other's truth. And we realized through that, now, credit my mom for this because she had my father passed away when I was young, and she got married a second time, and she focused so much on that marriage. She went out to dinner with him every Wednesday and Saturday, and that was nothing came in the way of that. And I watched this as a kid and how how bonded they became. And to me, that was the model. And for Patrick, his parents were married his whole entire life until his father just passed away at 87 years old, married, well over 50 years.
Oh my goodness.
And so we had these wonderful role models, and it I just one of the things that came out of that for us, and this, you hear this a little bit more now, but at the time I had friends that really criticized us for believing this, that our marriage came first. Yes, we had 2 kids, and we said this before we have kids. Our marriage comes first, because if that is not strong, everything else falls apart. And our kids see that. They see that we take the time to be together and focus on each other. And you know what, kids? You're not a part of this little happy hour that we're having right now. They both boys have said to us that that is the way they want to be with their significant other, that they understand the importance of the priority of the relationship. And my God, that makes me so happy. And we have an extremely close family, but I think it's because that we put each other first that is allowing space for that to happen.
Yeah, and you think about the impact if, like, when Blue Sky did not make it, if you didn't have that foundation,
Yeah, wouldn't have
you
lasted.
you've got nothing, and as you so eloquently said earlier, you lost your home, but you realized you had each other, and I just I'm grateful for you sharing that, because it's a drumbeat that I want to keep beating. I saw a YouTube video with Mr. Wonderful. He was being interviewed, and he was sharing a story about a student that said he had a dilemma, that he was engaged. He had already started a venture that was doing very, very well, but it required a lot of time. And his fiance wanted some time with him on Sunday. And he said, "What should I do?" And Kevin O'Leary
Okay.
uh, said, "Well, you're going to have to make a choice." And he said, and I think he made the right choice, implying that he chose the business
Oh,
over
God.
this relationship. And I'm just like,
Mm.
no. I mean, I think there needs to be an understanding, especially if one is an entrepreneur and the other is not. It's important for them to understand the risks. And I think that's one of the things that you address in your book, is the commitment that it takes. And it takes both of you being on the same page about, as you said, agreeing to start a business.
Mhm.
Because if you're in it together, then you can't go back later and say, "I told you so."
Yeah.
Even if the business makes it, or the idea or the invention or whatever it is that somebody starts, there are going to be rocky places getting to success. And I think we just don't talk about that enough. And so that's some of why we have these conversations.
Well, I think, and something important about that is that, as entrepreneurs, and with the pressure with investors and everything else, and feeling like society is saying we have to work 24/7, and that we're bad entrepreneurs if we're not working. We didn't make it happen because we feel like we're holding the whole thing together. And you know what? I'll call, excuse my language, bullshit on that.
Yep. Throw that yellow flag.
I, because it is, we are whole people, and if we're not fed outside, fed in every way, from things that help us to be healthy and relationships that are healthy, the whole thing falls apart. I think so many investors do not understand it, and you referenced that in a positive way earlier, is that taking the time for him to have taken the time with his spouse would strengthen his ability to come back to work stronger. It would create a stronger relationship, which, as you said earlier, is the bedrock to everything being thriving. If your relationship is falling apart, how can you possibly focus on being strong for the business. So it is us as whole people that have to be strong. And going and jamming through it all the time is the fastest way to burn out and is actually what's going to make the investors money not get a good return. So we have got to shift this culture as to how we think about startups.
I just want to say, preach it, girl. What about, was there other marriage advice that impacted your relationship? You talked about having very positive role models, and that is awesome because that's another thing that a
Yeah,
lot of couples just don't have.
yeah.
And I did a lot of premarital counseling when I had my office years ago. And I would often ask a couple, who do you have that's a role model for you? And they'd
Mhm.
look at each other like, nobody. And it just
Oh,
broke my heart, you know? But is there a book, or did you guys ever have a marriage coach or a counselor, or what are some other tools maybe that were helpful for you and Patrick? Anything come to mind?
well, it's not a tool, but I would say just it kind of goes back to your how do you support each other and really listening to each other. And so there was a situation. It's actually talked about it in my book. So I had a close group of girlfriends that our mommy group we called it, and we called ourselves the Mean Mommy Group, which is horrible. But we were this group. There was this big group of moms that got together, and we formed little groups within this bigger group of people that had like situations. And ours was we were all working moms. Believe it or not, in a group of 100 moms, there were 6 of us, and that was it. That was the only working moms in the group, which is really interesting. So fast forward in time, and here's Patrick and I prioritize our relationship. And this group of moms was 100% focused on their kids and 100% focused on partying in a big way. So, beside when they were outside of being with their kids. So we were, my husband was out of town, and I was going to, it was a party with these moms, and we were driving, I was driving with a friend of mine from Oakland to San Francisco. And my friend looked at me and she said, they were being, my group of friends is sometimes we are as women was being kind of like weird. Like they weren't really hanging around me as much. And I thought, what's going on with this? So she said, Sheryl, I got to tell you, we just don't agree, with the way you live your life. We think, you focus so much on Patrick and not enough on the kids. And here's, judgment upon judgment. And I started bawling, and I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, maybe I'm just like, must be such a horrible person. And I had to spend, we're all in San Francisco. I had to spend the whole entire night with all these people everybody hates me. I'm here with all these women. It was awful. So I come home and I called Patrick, and I said, yeah, I conveyed the story. And he said, Sheryl, why are you listening to that? He said, this is what we believe is important for our family. These are our values. Who cares what they think? And I thought to myself, I mean, this sounds really silly, but I literally thought this like, wow, I never even actually thought of that as a possibility of not really caring what they thought and being comfortable with what we believe because we made a very deliberate choice. And he just changed my whole entire mindset on the thing. And interestingly enough, years later, so I'm still friends with these people. This woman who I'm talking about ended up getting divorced from her husband. And she said to me, you know what? You and Patrick did it right. We didn't understand that, but you did it right.
Wow, what a great story. Coming to an end of our time here, I thought about a question that Stephen Covey asks in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he has an exercise where he tells you to envision yourself, you have died, you're in your casket, your friends, family, coworkers are coming by and paying their last respects. And that it's an exercise to illustrate start with the end in mind.
Mm.
So I'm curious, Cheryl, with all the amazing things that you've done, how do you most want to be remembered?
Is somebody who gave lots and lots and lots of love, and that my husband and my kids, especially, and my friends, felt like I just and my colleagues just felt like I deeply, deeply cared about them, and they felt seen.
Well, I would love to meet you in person one day.
That would be awesome.
I feel like you have made the world a little better place,
Oh,
and we need as much of that in this day and age as we can get. So I want to thank you and Patrick for giving us a picture of what a supportive relationship can look like, even in the dark times. So, is there
thank
anything
you.
else you would like to share before we wrap up?
No, not other than I just want to thank you, because these are the conversations that need to be had more and more. So, again, we do change this culture of entrepreneurship and the way we look at it now. It doesn't have to be this paradigm. And so, thank you for the work that you're doing to help to create that change.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
As always, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Cheryl. And I'm curious, what struck a chord with you after hearing their story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me anytime at info@kathyrushing.com. That's Kathy with a K. You can also find more marriage resources at my website, kathyrushing.com, and sign up for my monthly email where we share like friends sitting over coffee. If you could give us a rating and a short review on Apple Podcasts, that really helps others discover this conversation. You're building a life together. Make it a great one. See you next time.